Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to my workshop. The project this time is to take a 1600cc or 1571 Type 2 engine, i.e. a Beetle block if you like, and we're going to upgrade the engine, I hope, by using imported from the United States AA Performance Product piston and liner kit 1700cc motor and dual port head with larger valves. Looking rather like this. Now all I'm going to try and do is increase the swept volume, and I might change carburetors later on. The idea is to get a bit more power, not torque, power from the engine by increasing the swept volume and fitting and letting it breathe more easily with larger valves and perhaps a larger carburetor. Okay, so that's it for the moment. The engine will have to be stripped down and taken apart. I'll show you a few bits of that, and there we go. Well, I'll get on with the job then now. Well, here we are. Good morning, by the way. Here we are. We now have the tinware removed from the engine. This is where the turbine goes, and although it's dressed up, this is a CT engine, and although it's dressed up to look like a tin Type 4 with its turbine and its cover and so on, the dimensions, all the important dimensions as far as concerns the cylinder heads and studs and pistons and the crank, are essentially Beetle Type 1, Type 2. Okay, now this was going to be the Beetle Type 2 sort of engine and has a lot of very interesting history which I won't go into now because that's not the object of the exercise, but I just thought I would show you that this being a CT engine has a cylinder head with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fins. Right, avoid the camera swing. Whereas a Beetle head has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, this is the new head which also has 8. So that if you were running Beetle or Type 2 cylinders, these were Marla, rather good ones at the time, but they're worn out, and if you're running Beetle cylinders and a CT head, you would notice that there's a fin missing, if you like. Doesn't seem to have caused a problem. Here is a CT barrel, and we'll count them together. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So the barrel was taller and the thing was deeper. Now, this meant that, well, here we go, gently round, this meant that, here we go, this distance on these heads is shallower, and the head internals are slightly downhill, which allows for the use of 19mm length of thread for the spark plugs. whereas on the Type 2 or Beetle engine you've only got 13 millimeters. Okay, so now we'll go on a little bit further. This is from AA Performance Products, part number, dual port head, big bore, big valves, single high rev springs. Okay, so let's look at this rather nicely machined head, I must say. Very well boxed, very fast delivery. I'll talk about that a little bit later maybe. Excellent. So far so good. Now the first thing that you'll note is, always just check that, whoops, that you have got the right height of head. You haven't sort of, you know, done something silly. Now, okay, now we just show you that it does indeed have larger valves. Look, there you go, like you see. Okay. Alright, this is all going to help the engine breathe more easily. Okay, so that's looking fine. I'm going to check these out in detail later on. Now, a couple of the features of these are supposed to be that it does have certain advantages. For example, let's just close that down. As you can see, here are the studs that hold the rocker arms, and there's a little rubber washer in there because the bolt goes through there and there. And if that's been wound in and out and messed about a bit, there will be a leak there, a consistent oil leak you can't get rid of. So that's good. The other useful thing is it's plugged for a heat sensor, which would allow you eventually to start talking about fuel injection or having a very good control of how your cylinder heads are set up. Now then, there we are. These are nicely done. As I say, I'm going to go into this in more detail later, but now if you were running a Beetle, presumably you would want to keep the, oops, I'm going to lose these valves eventually. You will want to keep the little heat deflector, which, you see, that's the little heat deflector. That looks as though it will go in all right. What else? Little torch. Now that's interesting. They're blind, you see. That's blind. Whereas on the EW head, you see, you can see that all the way through. Okay. Otherwise, it all looks nice and tidy. So this was just to show you a little bit about the dimensions that are available, because what we're going to do is that without altering the stroke of the motor, because we're not touching the crankshaft, it's a standard Beetle dimensions crankshaft. It's not a Beetle crank, it's a crank that's used in the later water boxer engines, or same dimensions of bearings anyway. And there we are. So that was to show you the differences in dimensions that there are. You'll also notice that the engine is covered in oil. This is because these cylinders and barrels have done a very high mileage, and when I was coming back up a long uphill, 30 kilometers uphill stretch, I lost power and oil. There was far too much crankcase pressure, it was dumping oil into the air cleaner, and also oil was coming out of the dipstick, being sucked up by the fan and blown everywhere. So there we are. So that's a fairly good sign that we've got unhappy cylinders. There we are. Okay, well, I'm going to start taking this down a bit further now. Right, here we are at sort of halfway in the strip down. That is to say that the tinware is off and the cylinder heads are off and the push rod tubes and the push rods are off. And as you can see, that despite a few differences in the casing, the essential part of what we're talking about here and there is essentially beetle. So this will work on type 2 vans and so on. The idea is to give a little bit more power for climbing hills, particularly. Okay, so I'm now ready to start drawing the cylinders off. Note the keepers. I can now remove the blocking tool so that I can turn the engine over and remove the pistons and so on and so forth. What else is there to note? Yeah, this engine suddenly lost power and all the rest of it and so on. Look at the amount of oil there is in that cylinder. I think we're going to find that the piston rings have perhaps seen their best days. Anyway, there we are. That's where we are at the moment. And I shall have a beer break, I think, fairly soon. I shall be removing that, turning it all over, and so on. Okay, that's it for now. Now then, here we have the block getting stripped down. Pistons and cylinders are off. The tinware is off. Now I've left the cooler and the filter on deliberately, because when you tilt the engine up like this, it's a good time to see if there's been any little oil leaks in the bottom, and this has leaked. So I'm going to be changing that. You can use a 2-litre one, but a CT one has the oil pressure switch mounted therein. Hopefully I have a spare one in stock. Now then, just before we start putting the engine back together again, you must always take the bottom plate off. And the bottom plate, which comes off, and then you have the gasket, and you take the plate out, and you clean all the sludge, and you put out. Now, just to show you, on the CT engine, they had the very simple one with no drain plug, so you had to pull it all out and so on. So I thought I would be clever and fit a replacement. But as you can see, look at the difference in the thickness of metal between an old original one and this modern copy. And so consequently, when it tightens up, can you see it's dished? So I don't think that's made a very oil tight join. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recondition an old original VW one and put that on. Right. Otherwise, everything is going just fine and dandy. Well, here we are again, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, with this CT engine, which is becoming more and more like a Beetle block, is pretty much dismantled. In fact, we're past the dismantling stage, because as you remember, we put on the sump plate, and what we have done is we have changed the flywheel oil seal here, and the crankcase oil seal here for a genuine VAG. But the old one was fine, hadn't leaked, but once you go this far for a few dollars more, there we are. So that's that been done. That's that been done. Note, by the way, that because this is a CT flywheel, you've got the two little blibs for the sensor to pick up top dead center which could be useful eventually if you wanted to go towards fuel injection. Okay, now the other thing is CT specific is that you've got this turbine hub that you have to pull off, take out the Woodruff key, and there is an O-ring that goes inside the housing itself and another O-ring that goes inside here, and the size they give you in the book is incorrect. The size that fits inside my one here is 37.5 by 4 thick, and there was 2 of them, and that's what it looks like, and it goes on the inside of that as it goes on, and you put that in. Now what I've done also is the Woodruff key, I've shortened it slightly because otherwise it pushes up against it. You can just see there, it pushes up against the O-ring, which can't make life any better. So that's that little modification. That's it. Flywheel oil seal, you'll see it on various other videos. You know, your buggy engine in 20 hours and stuff. Don't forget that you're going to clean and grease. Can you see it's got the little roller bearings inside here? That's got to be cleaned and greased before the flywheel is put on. Now, why did I also change this? Because prior to putting the seal in, with the flywheel on, like I've shown in other videos, you check the end float of the crankshaft, because obviously if we're going to be putting a bit more power through, we don't want excessive play. And this, because I only did this engine a little while ago, has not changed. 0.8 millimeters of float. There we are. Well, that's it for now, and now I'm going to start looking at building up the rest. Bit of cleaning, and then we'll start looking at these new barrels and cylinder heads. Right, bye for now. Right, well, here we are again with these AA performance parts, cylinder heads, dual port, 90.5 to 92 bore. In other words, they've been opened out to allow a larger cylinder to fit. They've got larger valves, stainless steel, and it has single springs. So the question that's really pertinent is, can you bolt them straight onto the engine out of the box and use them, and will they have compression and so on? So what we're going to do is we're going to put some paraffin in here, and we're going to let it sit there and see if it leaks out. If there's no leak, it means that the lapping of the valves is good and holds pressure. Now then, a couple of interesting things. Number one, instead of using the standard large plugs, it uses slimmer 12 millimeter, so that's 18 millimeters on here, 12, 18, and so on, which I think is a rather good idea, because while the valves are bigger, it gives you more room here to risk a break. Look, I'll show you on the old CT. Look, there's the old CT, there's the crack, you see, and that's with a little valve, you see. Now then, so small plugs. I've been having a look around. By the way, they're delivered beautifully packed and boxed with loads of strong polystyrene and so on, so they won't get damaged. However, once you start working on them, put 13mm nuts on there just to protect the threads. Now, I've had a good look over this, and you can see where the flash has been machined off with a rotary type tool, and it's pretty good. The only complaint I've got, if it's only a niggle, look, can you see here? You see it's been machined off, but it hasn't been cleaned out inside. That's an exhaust port. The other exhaust port is fine. More important are the inlets, as it were. And as you can see, they look very nice. Nice and not too smooth. And there we are. Okay, so I'm going to have to machine that off. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a paraffin test. Look at both heads, obviously. And then there we go. And then we'll have a couple of valves out and have a look at how the valve seats are done. So I'm going to get on now and do the grinding on that end. Okay. Right. So we've done a little bit of grinding work. That just needed a tiny little touch. Nothing anywhere else. Good, no flash. Now, as you can see, maybe, can you see, bleep, 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 bleep. I use white spirit or something very, very clean, obviously, and very penetrating. And you fill the chambers just so that you're full. Look, can you see that? Right? Just so that you can see. Now, leave that for half an hour. And if that hasn't drained out, I would then say that if all the heads are like that, you could test when you get your own. If it's like that, then you shouldn't have to do any further valve lapping, which is good news. There we are. So I'm going to let that do its little thing for a while, and then we'll do this head, and then we'll start looking at preparing the cylinder heads prior to fitting the barrels and so on. Okay. So here we have the old and the new cylinders, and as you can see, it's all looking quite nicely made, clean. And what's interesting is that while the deck height is going to be the same, see, the sleeve is shorter, okay, and the machining is slightly deeper, which could well be advantageous. Right, you can see this is a thinner skirt, so let's just have a little try there. Let's see what we get. There we're getting 2.15 millimeters, and then we try again, and here we're getting 0.9. See, so it's a lot thinner. And the bore, 87.9, and the bore 85.3. Okay, so it's obviously a different bore, different height. Now then, oops, I'll just go on, let you go to naught. Now then, pistons. All the pistons have got a little dot, which means presumably they weigh the same. We're going to be checking that. Now, it comes in its plastic bag with the wrist pin or gudgeon pin, and it has circlips to hold them in. I don't like circlips because I don't like circlips. I would prefer to reuse, if possible, we'll have to check whether they fit nicely or not, whether we can reuse these. Okay, it's just me being finicky. Now, coming back to the question that I asked earlier, are you going to be able to use these straight away? In other words, allowing for a bit of alignment, but that's slightly out of alignment. Now, it may be a bit old school, but when I set up a new piston, what I like to do is to have the oil control ring, that's this one, here at the top, and then round, imagine like a sort of a Mercedes badge. You've got one here and you've got the other one over here, so that you've got the gap on one, gap on the next, and gap on the next. And that way, when it compresses up, you don't have them aligned, right, which is what you want to avoid. So the question is, when we pop the piston, are we going to find that the rings are correctly aligned? Because I'm going to show you two ways of putting pistons onto the engine. There's one way where you put just the piston itself on, and the piston goes on, and then you put the compressor ring, the ring compressor on, and you slide the cylinder on. However, there is another way of doing it if you're organized, and that is that you set everything up. You keep the piston in the thing. You don't take the piston out of the cylinder at all. You bring the piston up so that you're this high, look, so that I won't compress this, it's still got the rings, but you imagine you're going to take this down so that you can still get the gudgeon pin, and the piston rings are still just in there. And if you're careful and you do it round the right way, you can put pistons and barrels onto the engine without the aid of a spring compressor. Okay, this has been serving me faithfully for the best part of 40 years, so I know where we are with that. Okay, so I'm going to take out that piston, and we're going to see if the rings are. In fact, we'll take out all 4 pistons and weigh them. They're marked. Oh yes, let's just have a look. You see, right, the arrow goes to the front. Most important is that the arrow goes in the same way all the way through the engine, and these are supposed to be 87.95. So let's see how that comes up. It's all fine, there's no burrs. This edge looks nice. Now we come to the question of, are we going to lap these in? Well, we could do it not lapping them in, and then we could do a leak down test afterwards. But it's always looking pretty good so far. Okay, so I'll get on to the next stage. Okay, here we go. Right, well here we are. We've pulled the piston. Now then, arrowed, so goes towards the front of the engine, or more importantly, all the arrows point in the same direction. 87.95 is the operating diameter with the piston rings compressed and so on, so I would expect to see the it'll be 87.7 or something like that. Yeah, you see, there we go, and there you can see that there's quite a big difference between that and that. 85, you know. Right, okay, now coming back to the question, could you use these straight away out of the box? Well, as you can see, there is oil in the bore, and a little bit old-fashioned maybe, but there we are. You can see quite clearly, look, this is how it's drawn out. I haven't turned these around at all. There's one there, there's one there, and the other one has got, the last one is actually has 2. Look, it's got one there, and then one there. So you've got gap, gap, and gap. For me, that's okay. For me, I will say that you would be able to use that. But before you used it, I think you would put oil. You would not do any harm to put oil down there and let it soak for quite a while. Right, okay, so far so good. Now, obviously, as we've gone up in diameter, we're going to go up in weight. So let's see what happens. We're going to do the all-up weight. That is to say, piston, cotter pin or wrist pin, and its clips. Okay. It's not very high technology. Works fine for me. Right. Okay. 0, 0, 0. What are we reading? 556, 555. Now this one will be heavier because it's a bigger piston. Yes, 605. So there's 50 grams, sort of best part of 2 ounces difference between the piston. So the next thing to do is I'm going to pull that off, and I'm going to take another one and weigh that one. In fact, I might take them all out and weigh all 4, because being a boxer engine, if there is any difference, if you see that it's 2 pairs of pistons by the weight, then make sure that you have opposing pistons, if you see what I mean. So that one and that one would be a pair, and that one and that one. Okay, so boxer engine. Okay, apart from that, I like to see this sort of rings. This is good, quite fine in the lands. There we are, nice convention thing. Dark piston, well machined. I'm going to see if one of these circlips will happily lodge in there. Very important, you don't want that coming out. And there we are. Okay, so I'll take a little pause there and then set up for the next bit. Okay. While we're at it, we might as well weigh the cylinders. Gives us some idea of the difference. So we'll it's just for information, really. Right, nicely in the middle. That weighs, yes, they're 2 kilos, those pots. 2063. This, all right. And then this one will be a little bit heavier. It's not lining it with a feel. 2063. Oh yes. 2466. It's 300 grams, 10 ounces roughly, heavier than that one. Okay, so there's an increase in weight because it's 4 times the difference and so on. And the piston being heavier increases the forces in the engine, the inertial mass, and all the things to do with simple harmonic motion. Okay, we turn that off, and I think I'm going to have my lunch break now.